safely to the Earth.
Project Apollo was a goal achieved and hard to top.
The issue with Apollo had nothing to do with cost effectiveness or even scientific return.
John Logsdon of George Washington University serves on 2 NASA advisory committees.
Shuttle is a totally different program. First of all, it was not accompanied by a presidential commitment. It was a kind of survival decision for NASA. It was a compromise designed by a committee. Explicitly traded off cheap development and higher operating costs. It was, if you're going to build a whole program around something, you don't starve that something. And that's the way the shuttle program was run from the start.
The past successes, the can-do attitude, all that has now been put into question by one awful 73-second flight on a cold January morning.
I made the direct statement that if anything happened to this launch, told him I sure wouldn't want to be the person that had to stand in front of a board of inquiry to explain why I launched it.
Today at the Kennedy Space Center, the Presidential Commission investigating the Challenger disaster heard technical explanations of what may have gone wrong. NASA engineers said they now believe the right rocket booster is a probable cause, but they're not sure why the booster failed. There are a number of possible scenarios, several involving rubber O-ring seals in the boosters, which are designed to keep gas and flames from escaping after ignition. Today, for the first time, NASA said the seals may have been damaged during a repair operation before a Challenger ever reached the launch pad.
If you look at that, it looks as though there may be an anomaly in the O-ring and some change in dimension at that point.
But there may have been other problems, and it was a debate about some of those that last week led Commission Chairman William Rogers to conclude that NASA's decision-making process was flawed. Warnings apparently were given, but not heard.
Determination was to launch, and it was up to us to prove beyond a shadow of a doubt that it was not safe to do so. This is in total reverse to what the position usually is.
As the 7 astronauts boarded Challenger, they did not know that the night before, engineers for Morton Thiokol, maker of the powerful solid rocket boosters, had expressed grave reservations about the mission. The engineers feared that cold temperatures might keep the O-ring seals from working properly. After a previous cold weather liftoff in January 1985, serious erosion of the seals was found to have taken place. In July of '85, Thiokol's chief expert on rocket seals wrote a memo to his superiors, warning that unless improvements were made on the seals, a failure could result.
The result would be a catastrophe of the highest order, loss of human life.
Temperatures as low as 18 degrees were predicted for the night before Challenger's liftoff. Thiokol engineers recommended against a launch.
There was never one positive pro-launch statement ever made by anybody.
Well, as I recalled, there were some fairly strong comments about being appalled by the recommendation, about trying to institute new launch commit criteria at the last minute, about when we'll ever get this launch off. I thought those were fairly strong comments.
And those were comments, according to your recollection, were made by whom?
Well, the comments relative to the launch commit criteria and when we'll ever get this off was made by Mr. Larry Malloy.
What I was challenging were conclusions that were drawn. The recommendation not to launch or to launch at that time wouldn't upset me one way or the other.
But Thiokol engineers felt pressure, and NASA asked the company to reassess its data. Thiokol Vice President Jerry Mason took another poll.
Mr. Mason said, "We have to make a management decision." He turned to Bob Lund and asked him to take off his engineering hat and put on his management hat.
When you spoke to Mr. Lund and told him, in effect, to take off his engineering hat and put on his management hat, wasn't that pressure on your part to a subordinate that he should change his mind?
Well, I hope not, but it could be interpreted that way.
Why didn't you just tell them it's our decision and this is it, and not respond to the pressure?
As a quarterback on Monday morning, that's probably what I should have done.
About 30 minutes later, Thiokol agreed to okay a launch. Did NASA pressure Thiokol? The agency says no.
I did not perceive, nor did I personally exert any pressure on Thiokol.
Testimony over the last few weeks has pointed up apparent weaknesses in NASA's decision-making process. And today's testimony highlighted the possibility that we may never know for sure what caused the shuttle to explode. Some think that by setting an ambitious goal of at least 24 shuttle missions a year, NASA may have generated pressure that even a can-do agency could not handle. The question now is how this one tragic accident will affect NASA's agenda and the nation's commitment to the exploration of space. This is Michael Connor for Nightline at the Kennedy Space Center in Florida.
Later, we'll talk about the risks faced in spaceflight with a man who's been there, astronaut Hank Hartsfield. But first, when we come back, we'll be joined by Senator Ernest Hollings of South Carolina. He's been highly critical of the shuttle investigation, and by Jerry Griffin, a NASA veteran of 25 years who recently retired as director of the Johnson Space Flight Center in Houston.
This is ABC.
As director of the Johnson Space Center, Mr. Griffin spent 25 years with the Federal Space Agency in positions ranging from flight control to upper-level management. Senator Hollings, why do you want a Senate investigation? It seems to me the President's commission is doing a rather extraordinary job.
Not extraordinary at all. Actually, Ted, they're disorganized in the context of what's important is being already gone into. Yes, what they did today was important, but what's even more important is being ignored, and that is why were the procedures reversed? The case is getting cold. You need field investigators. I've told that to Secretary Rogers, but they're trying to do it all themselves. I couldn't do it, you couldn't do it, but you need the field investigators to follow up with the hard questions down there at Huntsville, up at Thiokol, and here in Washington. Why were these safety procedures reversed for the first time? NASA has never launched over the objection of a contractor saying that it was unsafe. Here, 2 contractors said it was unsafe. It's been reversed, and now they're on to the booster itself today in the public hearing, how it was so cold. Last week, the Marshall Space Center crowd said that the cold didn't even affect the O-ring. Now it whopped the entire booster itself. That may be all right. Keep on investigating that, but let's not let the case get cold, the witnesses get lost, the testimony become obscured. I want to know from Malloy, when he says he was only bringing challenges, that was challenges not to practice safety, but to violate safety.
Senator, let me ask you this.
Yeah.
And I'm talking now just on the basis, those sound bites that we had, they were
Right.
all taken from the Presidential Investigating Commission.
Right.
And as you string them together there, you were forced to the unalterable conclusion that somebody really screwed up there. I mean, you can't
Right.
look at those sound bites without knowing that pressure was brought to bear. It may have been the kind of subtle corporate pressure that folks afterwards like to pretend didn't exist, but you listen to those people, you can't help but conclude that there was pressure. Now, what more do you think you're going to get?
Now, why the pressure? Where did it come from? That's what we're doing. We're looking at the technical. We're looking at the hardware failures this week. We ought to be pursuing even more diligently the human failure. They started on it last week. All of those bites were from last week. Why not follow it up right now? Why not find out on National Public Radio? We had many witnesses saying, look, we thought it was going to blow up on the pad. We thought, by cracky, that it would never fly, and we all, when it exploded, knew why. Why don't they follow up that testimony? I want to know why. I want them to come to the Congress and say, look, if you've got this space program on such a schedule that they're just putting flights up to keep a schedule, making it unsafe itself, maybe Congress is at fault. Maybe the White House. Did they bring any pressure? Let's look into this. Did the contractor, was he trying for the renegotiation of his contract?
All right,
was he bringing pressure?
Senator, you're raising a heck of a lot of interesting questions.
Right.
Let's pose some of them to Jerry Griffin.
Yeah.
Why that pressure, Mr. Griffin?
Well, Ted, I think Senator Hollings has opened up so many subjects there that it's hard to comment on any one.
Pick any one of them.
Let me drop back a step. I think what we've had here is an accident in a very risk-intensive business that we must find the cause of why it happened. Obviously, something went wrong with the hardware, with people's decisions, whatever. My hope is that what we'll do is let the accident investigation proceed to a point, and they are reducing the number of scenarios to where we know for sure what happened. Then we can go back and question, why did it happen? Failure has been a visitor to American rocketry since its beginning. And Lord knows, I hope we don't have another one. But it's not unusual. I think it's something that we've got to drive the risk as low as we possibly can, but we'll never drive it to zero.
Mr. Griffin.
I think people have got to understand that and do the best we can.
Well, Jerry, this was the unusual. Isn't that true? Doesn't everybody agree? Don't you agree that they never did go over the objection of a contractor when he said it was unsafe? Have they ever launched before like that?
Let me describe something about the launch decision process itself, and it's more than just launching solid rockets and main engines on the orbiter. The people that have got to make that decision are making decisions that are literally a pyramid. It's three-dimensional, because not only are they looking at launch, they're looking at what's going to happen in orbit. We got to make sure the vehicle is safe to land and re-enter. So the idea of making sure that the rocket system is ready is only a piece of the puzzle.
Mr. Griffin, do me a favor, because we have limited time here. Senator Hollings has raised, it seems to me, an exceedingly important point, and that is there any precedent for the decision makers to launch over the recommendations of some of the technical people, like the folks from Thiaco?
Well, Ted, again here, what I was building to is that what you've got is a pyramid of decisions where you actually delegate to lower levels exactly what certain decisions that must be made, because people at top just can't make all of them.
I do understand that, sir. What I'm saying is, and I realize that sometimes these answers are more complex than the questions would seem to suggest, but there must be a generalized answer that can be given to that. Has it ever happened before?
Let me say, in my judgment, we have always had some people that were nervous about launching any vehicle, and that's why the decision tree has to work. The point is that the contractor here made a decision, for whatever reason, both technical and managerial, that I think he made based on his best judgment and his best input. Now, that's got to be tested. If temperature was a problem, and the folks there at Thiaco were saying don't launch because there's a temperature problem, then Roger, we've got a problem that we've got to deal with.
All right, gentlemen, let's take a break. When we come back, we'll be joined by a veteran shuttle astronaut, and he will be coming to be with us in just a moment, Hank Hartsfield. And we'll talk to him about the impact on the future of manned space flight. Final test flight in 1982, commanded Discovery on its mission in August of 1984, and commanded Challenger on a mission in October of 1985. Sitting on top of those rockets, on top of those boosters, Mr. Hartsfield, requires a certain element of faith. Do you still have the same faith now that you had when you went on those missions?
I think so, Ted. I've thought about that an awful lot. I have a philosophy, and I think a lot of the people in the office share that philosophy, is that we know the risks, we know the things that can go wrong, we assess that, and we make our decision to fly. There is, in my opinion, something that went wrong this time, because apparently for a year or two we've been having problems with seals, with the solids. I did not know about that, and that didn't get into my risk assessment. However, I think we've got a good track record. We shouldn't forget that we've launched 24 of them successfully, and I'm anxious for the commission to get through with its work so I can look at that and we can fix whatever problems they come up with and move ahead.
Would you have liked to have been a part of that decision-making process? Would you have liked to have known, for example, had you been one of the astronauts on this mission, what some of the concerns were? Do you think the astronauts have a right to be consulted when, for example, Morton Thiaco comes along and says, we have our doubts about launching on a cold day like this?
Well, my personal opinion is yes, and in the past we've been in on that. I can give you an example from 41D, the first flight of Discovery, in which we had a hardware problem that was brought to our attention the night before we were supposed to launch. The problem could have manifested itself in a way that we would not have separated from the solid rocket motors. They had a fix, but it was going to mean a day's delay to put some software, new software in the bird and test it. And that was brought to me, and I was asked my opinion. Do I want to go tomorrow, take the risk, even though it's very low, or do I want to wait a day and fix the problem? I elected to have the problem fixed. So the system worked there like it should have.
I gather there is a little bit of resentment in certain quarters against Sally Ride, who yesterday told one of my ABC colleagues that the way things are configured right now, she wouldn't want to go up again, that she is not as confident as she once was. Does that represent a minority view?
I don't think so. When I said I have faith in the system, I have faith in the system is going to find the problem and fix it. Right now, for example, I wouldn't go. I think we've got a problem with the seals. It needs to be repaired, and I think I share that view with some other guys in the office.
Who would you like to see conduct this investigation? Do you have the confidence that the Presidential Commission can sort it all out, or would you rather put it in Senator Hollings' hands?
Well, I first, with all due respect, I think I would like to first see what the Commission comes up with. I think they're getting some good answers. They're not doing it totally on their own. They're getting a lot of inputs from NASA and people. I know that our own people, I participated in a team that's dug into some of the data that came from this flight and trying to provide the information on which a decision can be made as to what happened. Hopefully, the Commission's got about 3 more months. They'll come up with the answers. I know I'm very anxious to read that report because I want to find out myself what their assessment is.
Senator Hollings, it has been suggested, it may even have been suggested by you, that some of the pressure may have come from the White House itself.
Right.
Why?
There's no question that the White House was interested in this. I never have found out who was in contact with that particular shuttle launch. Here the president was talking that day. He had a speech prepared. He had everybody in the room ready to be briefed at 12 noon just before the particular explosion. We can't find copies of that speeches. It is reported that he would be referring in that talk to the astronaut, Krista McCullough, who was going up, the school teacher and what have you. There's been a total blackout on that particular score. We don't know, but let's clear that up. Why in the heaven's name would you not get into it and clear it all up and find out where the pressure's coming from? Now, let's go back to Hartsfield. He's right. They do have a good track record. They have a lot to be proud about, and their process was tried and true. Herein, it was violated. It's just not a question of nervousness. This is no time for, at time of launch, for split decisions. They have never in the history of NASA ever launched over the objection of a contractor, and 2 separate contractors for 2 different reasons said it was unsafe.
All right, let me, Jerry Griffin, let me ask you this question. I mean, and I say this without the sarcasm that you may detect here. Here now we have one of the avenging eagles of the U.S. Congress, but this is the same U.S. Congress that wasn't giving NASA the amount of money that NASA said it needed. Any fault there?
No, I don't think so. The pressure, if there was pressure, was not anything new to the NASA system. In fact, Ted, we were increasing the flight rate, flying more often because of good decisions, I think, made through the congressional process. That is, to build more orbiters, build more launch pads, have more facilities, etc. Now, the fact is that, and I don't think I can accept the fact that the White House put pressure on this particular launch. We've had Jake Garn and other people that have flown. We've scrubbed those missions. If anybody in the management chain that had to make that final decision had thought that it was unsafe to launch, they had no motivation to launch. Because, in fact, we have an old saying in NASA, an on-time failure seldom gets an award. And we think about that. We don't want a failure and in the interest of schedule.
Mr. Hartsfield, I'm going to leave you the last comment because you're the only one who's been up there. Why, if there was no pressure, and if, as we now know, serious questions were raised, why then, in heaven's name, do you think it was launched that day?
Well, I have no idea. There are pressures in this program. There are pressures of the manifest. We had an ambitious flight schedule, but there are pressures all along the program. There's pressures on the crew to get trained. There's pressures to get the bird turned around. And all these pressures may take their toll. I'm hoping that the Commission will tell us whether we had too much pressure at the time. I don't know. I don't have the answers to that. I'm not privy to all the information they have.
Mr. Hartsfield, I'm afraid we're going to have to stop at that point. Gentlemen, thank you very much. Jerry Griffin, Senator Hollings, and, of course, Mr. Hartsfield, I thank you all for being with us this evening. I'll be back in just a moment.
This is New York Hot Tracks.